Welcome to another episode of Data Journeys. This is a place we come to learn from leaders in the data and analytics space. Today, I have the honor to talk to James. He's going to tell us about his journey, his fantastic success with data analytics, and we're going to conclude with the do's and don'ts. James, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Let's dive right into it. Tell us who you work for and what you do for them.
You bet. Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to share our story. I am honored and blessed to work for Feeding America. We are the national organization in the fight against hunger in America. And I am the director of solution architecture and applications. We represent a network of around 200 food banks. We have food banks in every state of the union, plus Puerto Rico. And we specialize in food rescue and helping our neighbors in need.
Now, tell me a little bit more about the organization and how you use data, particularly how you coordinate all the work across all these food banks.
It can be challenging. Every state has their own laws and regulations. Each of our food banks is its own separate entity. So we don't own the food banks. They don't report into us. We're a network. So each food bank operates independently, but then we also try to coordinate together and use our strength nationally to deliver the best we can. With the pandemic, things have been truly historic over the past year and a half. Last fiscal year, we delivered over 7 billion pounds of food to neighbors in need throughout the country. We also deal with disaster responses, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, pretty much anytime people become in need of food assistance, the Feeding America Network responds. Our food banks use data to track food coming and going to the various agencies that supply the food directly. Transportation and logistics data, food has to be moved around. We work with national partners for donations, both product donations and monetary donations. We distribute grants. You know, one of the statistics that Feeding America is so proud of is $1 given into our network can deliver 10 meals worth of food to people in need. And one of the biggest challenges we get on social media and advertising is people are incredulous about that number. They just don't believe that can be true. And it's done through obviously hard work, volunteers, data, and delivery. But America is blessed to have so much food available. And there's so many generous people willing to provide the food. The challenges are getting the food to the people who need it. So if there's a farmer who has a surplus load of fresh produce, good, healthy food that the farmer is willing to give to anyone who needs it, there's costs involved with harvesting the food. There's cost involved with transporting the food. And you have to get it to where the people need it. And that's where food banking and the Feeding America Network really can deliver.
These are amazing results. Tell us a little bit more about the systems and how data enables you to achieve your mission.
Sure. Each of our food banks has their own IT operations. They have an ERP system. Many of them have CRMs. They generally have some kind of warehouse management. They have to deal with transportation and logistics. And each of them largely sets up their own infrastructure. At the national organization, we also have our own systems. We're using NetSuite for our ERP. We're using Salesforce for CRM. We have a lot of various technologies. We use Microsoft Azure for a lot of our infrastructure needs. But as we've recently begun our more complex data journey, we've started relying a little bit more on Google Cloud and Informatica to be moving our data around our infrastructure.
And so you've built this enterprise data warehouse on BigQuery, centralizing all that data. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how that went.
Sure. We were a little late getting to the enterprise data warehouse game. One thing with food rescue, food banking, and non-for-profits, a lot of our funding for things like IT projects will come in through grants. So they tend to be more standalone siloed applications because we'll have a generous donor who says, I want to give money to do this one thing. So that one thing gets built because that's all the money was earmarked for. So trying to build an enterprise repository of data is something that we were challenged with for a long time. So we finally got that started. We got a new CIO almost 3 years ago, Marianne Burdick. She really championed the idea of centralizing and pooling our resources. So it's been almost 2 years since we started the enterprise data warehouse. And we spent a lot of time up front looking at the infrastructure. What was the technology stack going to be? How did we want to tackle things? So we're about 2 years into that journey now, and we have a long way to go still. There's a lot of data still out there to get, but we started with some of our member data from their ERP systems, along with our own ERP systems, and some of the information for some of our national donors.
And you've got a pretty rigorous approach to it. You established a single location for analytics and reporting, then you established a process for the enterprise data warehousing metrics, and you built your dashboards. So here you're talking about centralizing the information so you have clarity, but then decentralizing the consumption of the information. So, what's your biggest win so far?
Our biggest win so far has been what we call the food bank operations dashboards. So 200 food banks across the country, each one trying to build the same dashboard to run the operations of the food bank. Some of our food banks are very well resourced, a good urban area, great donor bases. Others are more challenged from an equity standpoint. They're in rural areas, they're in decentralized places, and to have each of them invest the money to build complex dashboards off of intricate data, it wasn't efficient. And the ones that did it, they produced some wonderful data artifacts, but from one food bank to the other, the numbers weren't always comparable because everyone was defining their own things, they were labeling their own things. So as we've started implementing this, we're able to roll out one set of dashboards to each of the participating food banks. And that way they can compare and contrast data with each other, as well as they don't have to build it, they don't have to maintain it, they don't have to upgrade it. We do it one time and it can roll out to the whole network.
That's an amazing service you're providing to the individual banks. And I agree with you, being able to centralize and then decentralize access, kind of building this data mesh is enabling everybody to benchmark themselves, but also focus on what they do as a job so you can provide them with the analytics services. Now, you have been in this space for a long time. You've been at Feeding America for 6 years, but before that, you were in the data architecture, business intelligence field. So let's move now into the section of the do's and don'ts. You've learned a lot throughout the years. Let's start maybe with the positive. What is the absolute must do anyone needs to think about as they're embarking on a similar journey?
I think there's a few things that we've learned. Definitely making sure that you choose the right technologies for the project that you're intending. We knew we were rolling out to a national base, and the cloud technologies really spoke to that. We've been really happy with our partners at Google. We built out our data lake in Google Cloud storage, which was surprisingly reasonable from a cost standpoint. We were really impressed with how well we were able to control cost with our data lake, and then using BigQuery to actually deliver the data in the data warehouse. We've never had a concern or a question about our performance from that, which was great. We're using Informatica to move data everywhere throughout the network. We use their Informatica Intelligent Cloud Service, and it works really well with all the Google products. Been very happy. And we use Tableau to deliver the analytics. And it has integrated wonderfully with Google, where we build a dashboard, and the first time it runs, it populates the Tableau data set so that we're not constantly having to re-query everything out of BigQuery. And that's been great. We're very cost conscious. So anything that we can do to limit costs, I mentioned the metric earlier of $1 can convert to 10 meals to our neighbors. So every time I go to spend money, there's always somebody asking me, now, how many meals could you have bought with that money? So, trying to do that calculation is something that it can be very humbling, but it makes us very, very cost conscious.
Speaking of the calculations, I want to hear a little bit about your best practices around how you manage this concept of calculations across this network. Do you put it down to the reporting tools? Do you centralize it at the data warehousing level? What have you learned through this process?
We definitely centralize all of our metrics and KPIs. As we build out more and more reports, more and more dashboards, we don't want to keep rebuilding the same calculations, both because we don't want to just keep redoing the same work, but also because then if something gets changed or updated, we don't want to have to try to remember the 10 different places we need to go and touch it. So on top of our enterprise data warehouse, we have a semantic layer of views and KPIs and metrics. And all of our reports, all of our dashboards, all of our data feeds, they all flow through that.
And so this is now built beyond Tableau, meaning if you're using a different BI tool, you'd be able to use that. Where is the semantic, I guess, being managed?
The semantic layer is entirely managed within Google BigQuery. So to an outside reporting tool, and we've had a few applications running in Power BI, but almost all Tableau outside of that. But to those applications, it looks just like any other data element in the data warehouse. They don't know which ones are calculated, which ones are physically stored, which ones came straight from a data source. We have our data dictionary, we have everything labeled and documented, so they know if they want to get pounds per year, this is where they go to get it from.
That's great. Now, talking about data dictionary, one of the issues with dictionaries is making sure that it's validated, it's certified. How do you make sure that happens on your end with such a diverse network of companies or members you're supporting?
One of the challenges is that since each of our food banks is their own independent entity in our network, we don't have the ability to push down data governance to the food banks. We're happy to advise. We're always happy to provide input or feedback, but in the end, their data is their data. So we don't do any curation until we receive that data from them. So for us, it has less to do with data cleanup than it has to do with data documentation, with understanding what the different food banks do. There's been one or two times we've had to make certain tweaks to some of our metrics and calculations because of the way the different food banks handle things. But we're, along with our data warehousing, we're also building out a new data governance practice. Some of my colleagues, Stephanie Zidek, just wonderful at putting some of this stuff together and partnering with the business and the technology side. So we have our daily stand-ups for the EDW project, and our data governance team is part of all of those meetings. So as we're building new data flows or putting out new calculations, they're right there in with us, building the catalogs and the data quality tools right along with it. So it's really a joint process where we've reached the point now where we actually have sort of a symbiotic relationship between our data governance and our data integrations, where instead of having my team go out and put together a mapping document in Excel or Word or some other Google Doc tool, they actually do it in the data governance tool, and we use Informatica to actually read that as our source for the mapping.
Got you. So basically here you're filtering, if you will, using Informatica as a tool, the validation certification of data. So by the time it gets into the data warehouse, you know that this is good data for everyone to use. You talked about the centralization of semantic layer as well, so it's flexible for any tool, any application to use it. So that's for the positive. Let's talk now about the negative, the things that people need to make sure they avoid as they're moving to this new world of cloud data warehousing and analytics in a data mesh context like yours.
I think the thing that I was slowest to learn is, after over 20 years working in data warehousing and database applications and data architecture, I had to throw out so much of my experience when it came to tuning and writing efficient queries. And some of the advanced people on my team had some of those same struggles. We're used to things like indexing and the way you form a join. And doing that in Google BigQuery is just totally different. There are some rules and some best practices for how to write your queries, but they're very different at times. And allowing the query to harness the power of that environment is something that took us some time to learn to do correctly. And until you learn how to do that, you're not getting the best out of that technology.
How did you learn how to do that?
Some was trial and error. Some was reading the internet. One great thing about working with Google is you actually, you go to Google and you Google about Google, and it sounds repetitious, but there's a wealth of information out there. We've also partnered with Google at times. We've worked with our reps and with some friends and partners over there. And, they've given us some time. They've sat down and talked us through a few things. Pre-pandemic, our local Google office used to frequently have training sessions that we would get invited to. And you learn like you always learn. You learn through experience and you learn through education.
All right, so then you talked about, okay, transferring to this new world of cloud. Just, you have to forget your habits, meaning you have to not write queries a certain way anymore. How do you kind of modernize into this new world and build new habits? What's the rule for you then? Is it don't write queries like you did at SQL Server or Oracle? What's the bottom line for you?
You definitely have to write them differently. You have to write them not expecting that I'm going to write a query and then build indexes later to make it efficient. And I think the biggest metric that we use to track our efficiency is the amount of data being returned. And when you're in Google BigQuery and you're running an ad hoc query, it will actually estimate for you how much data it's going to churn through to produce your result. And that number, you can look at that before you actually execute the query. And that, sometimes we write a query and I'm like, oh, that's a good query. That's going to be efficient. And then I look at it, it tells me it's, returning 500 gigabytes for what I'm thinking is a 5-row result set. So you look at that and you think, how could I write this differently now?
And this is something that we used to think about in the old days, where you had to kind of throttle a little bit how much data you were pulling, how much data you were working with. Has this new world of modern cloud data warehouse changed how you think about the amount of data that you work with?
It changed the order that we address the data in. So if you're joining multiple tables in Google BigQuery, you want to make sure that you reference your smallest table or your smallest result set first, because then everything down the chain of joins is throttled by that result set. And that is different. We used to talk about, looking at your cardinality and looking at your indexing, looking at what's going to produce a direct match instead of a like search. And now I'm looking at numbers of rows for the first table in my join.
Well, James, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us today. I could spend hours talking to you today about these best practices, centralizing semantics, and making sure that you don't load too little data so you can expand your analysis and make that available to everyone. If you want to hear more stories like this one, just make sure to subscribe to our playlist. James, thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks for having me, Bruno. This was great.